Welcome to Venessa Knizley's YouTube channel that I periodically take over because it's fun, and she lets me. So we have been talking about a lot of things over our time together. We even discussed a book that we have very different opinions on, and we didn't meet last week because I wanted to talk about Venessa's books, and I needed to catch up on where she's at in the series. So we skipped so that I could read more slowly and really enjoy it and not have to hurry because I'm a slow reader. So we're going to talk about Venessa's first 3 books in your series, correct?
Yes.
Because your 4th isn't out yet.
No.
Right?
Mm-mm.
I mean, I have the 4th.
Yeah.
Author friend benefits, but
Yeah.
I got it just in time to take camping. So I want to read actually a review of your books that I found on Amazon. Mind if I start with that?
Yeah.
Okay. It's of your first one.
Okay.
But I think it fits well for all of them. So I loved this book. It's been so long since I've read anything outside of my standby, contemporary Christian romance, that it took me a few chapters to acclimate, but it was a pleasant transition. Until recent years, this era was one of my favorites. Castles, lords and ladies, knights and squires, what's not to love? Unfortunately, there are very few Christian fiction novels, scratch that, well-written Christian novels set in this era. Knizley delivers a flawless setting. I did not feel in any way like I was reading a history lesson, nor did I feel that she was just guessing at how life would have been for Tristan and Valenna, but truly wrote as if she herself experienced the setting firsthand. But even more, Knizley wove together an intriguing plot that kept me guessing. I admired the friendship between the 2 main characters, appreciated the support of minor characters, drank in the descriptions of the castle and the forest beyond its stone walls, and felt my heart soar with the spiritual applications presented in moments that we all face in our own way. The characters were relatable, the story believable, the tension unexpected and exciting. I can't wait to read the next installment. I wrote that.
I was like, that sounds very familiar.
So let's start with how I felt about your book, and that is that was your first one.
Yeah.
And I just finished reading your 3rd and immediately texted Venessa to say, okay, is the 4th published? I haven't been keeping up. And she kindly sent it to me because Venessa likes to just end a book before you're prepared. So I really liked the 3rd the most. I don't know if other people feel that way, but the 3rd is where I felt like you really came into your voice. The story just took a turn in the 3rd that I just really appreciated. You brought in even new characters. Like sometimes with, I think, series you can get bored because all the characters are the same, but you keep bringing in new ones and refreshing what's happening. And so I've been kind of surprised by what's happening. So have you heard that from others, the 3rd? Or
I've heard that people liked it. I don't know if they've expressed why exactly. But I have heard that they do enjoy the new characters.
Now, what did you enjoy writing the most, like so far? Do you have a book, baby, that's a favorite? You're allowed to do that where you're not allowed to around children because no one has a favorite child, but you can have a favorite book.
Well, probably it's the 4th one coming up, actually.
Oh.
I feel like there's a very big introduction in the first book between the characters, and so you really get to know them, and it's just mainly them and their interactions. And then in the next book, something's like a wrench is thrown into their relationship, and so then the 2nd book is really their trying to work through. It's not just them anymore. There's other people involved that are affecting their friendship / relationship and wherever that's going. And then the 3rd one, and then the 2nd one brings in something that's very harmful to the 2nd character, or to a side character, which sort of remains a secret largely to Valenna, the main character, so she doesn't know about it. So by the 3rd book, then it's the 2 main characters, Valenna and Tristan. Tristan knows about the secret, Valenna doesn't, and so then there's this even new sort of arc where he's keeping things from her and his reasons, where he's never kept things from her before, because the first book is very much their friendship. Yeah. And so this is sort of the first time he's kind of doing harm in a way to that friendship, like not intentionally. And then this 4th one that finally comes, I felt like, okay, people are tired. People got to be tired of Valenna not knowing the secret. I'm tired of Valenna not knowing the secret.
I need her to know the secret.
Oh, the fourth one is really like tying up like so many loose ends that you're just waiting for people to learn about, yet it's going to give you this completely new issue to throw you into the fifth book, which though I feel like will keep you less frustrated in a way, because you're not going to be going, oh, 5 books to solve all these problems. Like, I feel like the fourth book is going to solve a ton of problems.
Okay.
But yeah, there's something else that then is like, what's the resolution now?
Yeah.
And then that throws you into the fifth book, which will sum it all up.
Okay. So when's the fourth book coming out officially? Or
for an indie author, that's kind of a weird question for me. Can I set my own date? Like a couple months?
Okay. So fall, maybe?
Yeah, I think so, fall. Yeah. Hopefully, I'm going to get out there as fast as I can.
Well, they said they're going to shut us down in fall again, so we'll need books to read. That's all my conspiracy friends say. No, that's just a conspiracy theory friends say. And then I hear other people be like, yeah, watch them try. Anyways, okay. It doesn't matter. So that actually leads me, I'm going to do these questions kind of out of order.
Yeah, no.
I'm really bad at coming up with questions. So you had asked your readers for questions, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they came up with good ones, and then off of theirs, I bounced a few. So we'll see how this goes. Hopefully we answer the questions that the readers wanted answered the most. Yeah. The ones that we don't cover specifically are probably because they were covered earlier when we talked about how you write. We've talked in a previous video about why you wrote about the Black Plague, because you felt like it gave you more freedom. It was interesting now being in this pandemic to see how right you were about how it changes how people feel and how they react. So one question from one of your readers was, how can what you learned about the Black Plague help you, us, readers, what have you, during our current pandemic? Like, how has it affected how you're behaving in this pandemic?
I read a lot of what people thought during the Black Plague, like their thoughts on it, and sometimes they've saved some letters, medieval letters that people have talked about it. There was a doctor who actually did get sick during the Black Plague, and then he took care of himself. Like he, pierced the buboes that they had on them, and he drained them. I mean, there was a stench that came from it. It was really, really awful. And he just sort of doctored himself, and he took notes. So he took a diary of his own diagnosis. Like, this is how I feel on this day. This is what I did for myself. And so he actually did recover.
Wow.
So not everyone who got it died, but that was unusual, more unusual to have someone recover, obviously. So because there was indications that the doctor would go to help someone and drop dead before the patient. Like there is something to do in the lungs, as well. And so respiratory. So I don't think that what we're experiencing now is any way like the Black Plague in terms of numbers or actual casualty symptoms, considering I know people who've had it now and have recovered just fine. But it's more the mental fear of the unknown, and that has been relatable, that I'm quarantining in my house and I don't want to leave. I don't know if writing the book has helped me now, or else just now it confirms what people might have felt.
Yeah, I feel like you hit it dead on.
I'm so happy, because I was like, what? I was trying to think, how would I feel if the world was ending? Because they thought the world was ending, that it was judgment from God, and that was that. And I just thought, maybe she would be traumatized enough not to even leave the castle. I'm gonna make her afraid to leave the castle. Now Tristan's not. Human nature does not really change. There are some people afraid, and there are some people not, and there are some people reckless with their lives. So there was these people who would go around and just take over houses that were abandoned because everyone died, and they would just have parties and orgies and just take over these houses and strip it of all its food and trash it and then move on. Not afraid of like drink, be merry before, tomorrow we die. So
Right.
there was that attitude there. And then and I brought that in because Velena was shocked when she heard that. How could people act that way? Versus
Right.
Tristan, who was a little braver. But even then, one of the times, her fear for Tristan outweighed her fear of being outdoors. So she went out to Tristan, but it even talks about, or I talked about how she was like, if even one person coughs, I'm going to freak out, And I didn't realize that would be so near truth. I just felt like in my imagining, that's how she would feel. But now I feel like when I'm in the grocery store, I don't want to cough or sneeze because I don't want to freak somebody else out.
Yeah.
I'm like, let me go around the okay, I'm fine.
Yeah.
I'm not sick. I have allergies.
Exactly.
So I'm pleased that
that's
it turned
awesome.
out. Yeah.
It's been interesting to read the third one now, like, because I read the second and third one during this pandemic, and the first one I read a few years ago, and so I thought I had read the second, and then I started reading and realized I hadn't. So it's been interesting to read, like, especially after talking to you when we talked about your writing style before in a previous video, hearing your reasoning behind everything and why they behave. Because I told you at first I didn't really like how free Velena was with the men, and how it felt more like people here being put in medieval times, but your reasonings behind it make sense because people do lose their minds when they're stuck at home, when they're afraid. I'm curious to go look back at history and see what was happening right after the plague. How were they behaving? What were they?
Well, kind of to answer that, what followed was a uprising from the peasants. That didn't happen, I think, for another, I'm probably wrong, I want to say like 20 years or something, but it was building up, or maybe it was even 10, and it was called the Peasant Revolt. And so basically the peasants were tied, and they weren't called peasants, they were called villains. That's where we get the term villain, spelled differently. Yeah. Anyway, so, and I can't go into this in my story because it was too far ahead in history at this point, but there was so much unrest. The villains were tied to each of their lords' domains, basically, and they were not allowed to leave. So they weren't slaves necessarily, but if they left, they would get in trouble and be brought back to that area. And if you wanted to get married to someone in another area with the villain, you would have to sort of pay the lord money because he'd be losing you as a worker. So you sort of had to, like, there was just a lot of rules for it. But then after the plague, there were so few workers, right? The king made a law. The workers were demanding more money. Before, they were oftentimes just paid with food and housing. But then afterwards, they really wanted to be paid. And so I think the king made an edict that they couldn't be paid more than a certain amount, but it was ignored because the peasants would be like, you're not giving me enough, they're going to give me more, and I'm going to move on. And there wasn't enough people to enforce bringing them back. And so they started gaining more power. And then when the lords and the higher ups left these vacant houses and manors, oftentimes one of the higher up villains could take over and start running it himself unless he was kicked out by someone else the king brought. There's all this. So eventually that power and their frustration and anger, it ended that class system. It was never the same after that. So a lot of things happened afterwards, and a lot of things are happening with us now. So
I was going to say, that's really interesting knowing, like, what's going on in our country now, which we won't get into all that because that's a little heavy for book talk, but yes, that's really interesting.
But basically,
I love it. I love
change follows change. Disaster brings about changes that you could have never predicted happen. And so,
Right. In your books, there's a great cast of secondary characters. Like, you start to really just feel like they're part of you. And I know they're based off of your group of friends in college.
Yeah.
So tell us why did you want to write a book? We covered it a little bit before, but, like, what about that time period is so important to you that you wanted to, like, seal it in a book for everybody to read?
while answering that question, I'll answer another question I know someone sent in because I feel it goes.
Okay.
One of the questions was, what genre was,
Yes,
so I can
that was
book.
what genre do they fit into? And
Yeah,
why?
and I feel like I've been hesitant to be true to the genre I'm in. I think the book is true to the genre I'm in, but I think I still express it a lot as a romance novel because there's romance in it, and I like to read romance novels, so in my head I want it to be a romance novel, but I think truthfully it's a coming of age story with romance elements. Because we talk about expectations. What are your expectations when you read a certain genre? And so I really need to give people the proper expectation of the book. So in college, I had a best friend named Justin, and we bonded in the strangest way. We were best friends. Half of the campus thought we were dating. We were never dating. Like, we didn't like each other. We never experimented with dating. It was just this wonderful time for us, awkward for other people, maybe, I don't know. They just couldn't understand us. They just assumed we were, or that we would get together. What was unique, I guess, is we both were very committed to the idea, I think, that we wanted to be friends for the rest of our lives. I think we each, and I don't know why, saw something deeper in our relationship that we wanted to last. And so neither of us were willing to experiment with what we felt God had given us. Now, I don't know if you necessarily feel that at the moment, but there were moments where we did feel that. We prayed together, like on our knees, that the God would let our spouses be fine with each other so that we could continue our friendship. And so I thought, for the book, I want to immortalize this piece of a boy and a girl being friends, like truly being friends. Yeah, I use this blessing in my life as the platform with which to jump off of. I want a book about a relationship that's very close, only I'm going to put some twists in it. See what would happen if I throw in all these wrenches, if I throw in what everyone thought we would have done or expected we would have done, and see how that turns out, and just kind of let it go. But I did allow the characters to go beyond what I was with Justin. Like,
yeah.
So basically, I guess this is the time to say it real quick, is the book opens up for others who don't know, the book opens up during the plague with a 15-year-old girl. She's engaged to someone named Peter, but her father's taking her, which a lot of the rich people did, to a castle or to the country to get away from the populace. And so that's where they go. Tristan, on his end, is the son of a very famous knight. The majority, if not all of his family have passed away from the plague. He kind of alone escapes it and ends up at this castle because his uncle is I'm going to say bailiff, that's the wrong word. Anyway, he's someone he runs the castle when Sir Richard's gone. And so he ends up there. So basically, they're the only two young people sort of the same station, he's 16, she's 15, and they are secluded in this castle for 3 years. She's so depressed, she doesn't even want to talk to anybody. She has a maid named Daisy, who's also her age, but that's her only other interaction.
I love Daisy.
Tristan basically comes to her and says, you know what? We're both super depressed. I've been watching you. Maybe we can help each other. And so they end up forming this friendship. And there are awkward parts in the beginning. There are some conversations that they have that are inappropriate. And I did that purposefully because I wanted to express the fact that there was nothing they would not talk about. One, they were unsupervised because Velena's mother had died. She didn't know if Peter was still alive because they didn't come to the castle with them. And basically they put their all, it's like when you go through something traumatic, you bond.
Right.
And so there isn't an overall arc where Velena does change. So if someone is upset in the first book, like, why are they talking about that? I don't understand. Like, if as you go on, she has moments where she realizes her immaturity and maybe there's an inappropriateness to some of their actions, that she needs to work on. And so there's a maturing in her, and that's why I say it's a coming of age story, because it doesn't keep her there.
Right. She definitely grows. And I like the third book. I love the internal thoughts of one of the new characters because he hasn't been in the picture. So he's watching her going, why is she behaving this way? And I kind of like it because I think some of your readers are thinking that, like, why is she behaving this way? And you kind of start to get used to how she behaves. She doesn't behave bad. She just behaves not how you expect in a medieval book.
Not maybe with as much decorum or training.
Right. And it makes you think that maybe all these books we've been reading are just really cheesy and really unrealistic and surface, where this is, I think you did a really good job of pulling out the human heart and the human element. And there has never been a time since Adam and Eve left the garden, there's never been a time of perfect human behavior. There's always been sin. There's always been tension. There's always been people making the wrong choice, even believers. And so, your book keeps it very level. It's very, even. It's just silly things like the way she interacts with men that are her friends, that are her age. Maybe they have inappropriate conversations, but what teenagers don't.
Right. So one of the things you brought up is in the so at the end of the castle, so the first book ends basically with her uncle coming back and finding out what happened to her betrothed. And so then it brings back some other characters. It brings into the picture Squire Rowan, Jaren, Stuart, her fiance's brother, who's also a cousin. And these are men she's grown up with as children. And so they're there for a time. Rowan happens to have known Tristan outside of the situation. They had actually met. And so they kind of have a bonding. Stuart and Jaren have this other bonding. So these other things kind of happen during this time. And Rowan, let's say, he's playful, but he still recognizes that she's a girl. And these are some of the differences too. Tristan is her friend and refuses to let his mind go beyond that. Whereas there's this one point where she goes running to clear her mind and learn to pray. It's a little bit odd, but she dresses up in men's clothing. And while she's behind a tree with Daisy, and I'll get to that in a minute, Rowan says, she's naked right now, to his friends. And
everyone has one of those friends.
Yeah, Rowan's that friend. And he says it to Tristan, and Tristan's like, I don't want, he's not going to get mad at Rowan, but at the same time, he's not going to indulge him. And then he gets frustrated at where his mind starts to go. And he's like, no. I did try to show a little bit of, lest anyone think that I approved of the conversations, that was one of the reasons why Daisy is a good character, because she is always calling Venessa out. That is inappropriate. Why are you letting Tristan do this? I hate Rowan. Like, Daisy did not like Rowan. She did not like Tristan for most of the book.
Yeah.
She's frustrated, feeling like, Venessa, you are not acting appropriately. You are potentially engaged to someone else if he's still alive, and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And so there are people calling out these bad behaviors, and I hope I brought that out enough to at least say, I know they're wrong. They're happening, but I know that they shouldn't happen.
Right.
They are happening.
Yeah. And they're not, just to put your readers at ease, or future readers, they're not over the top vulgar. They're little innuendos, they're little, and I think even in the third book, you outgrew them. And except for the people that already have dirty minds are still showing their true character. Does that make sense? Right. Sorry, I got kids running around back there.
Oh, that's okay. Because Stuart in the second book reveals that he's a very ungodly man.
In a lot of ways, I think. And some people don't like that in a Christian book we're trying to be careful here not to give
you can say it. You can yeah.
I don't go ahead. It's a good, so Stuart is a character that he's the villain everybody needs, but he's confusing to me because he doesn't know he's a villain. And it seems like most villains know that they're jerks, and he doesn't know. And Venessa doesn't know, and she's potentially set up to be engaged to this man, and we won't get into that. But someone had asked, you have some raw scenes in your book that Christians don't like to read about. And let me say, you don't go raw, you don't go detailed, you just allude to things that happen that are a big deal for the rest of the plot. So why did you feel it was necessary to have these sinful occasions in your book, and as a Christian author? Like, what would you say to this?
Stuart does something very wrong, and that's right. I don't go into it. Basically, I just say it happened, because I didn't feel like anyone wanted to read about that, and I didn't really want to write about that. So, but the question from that person was more of, why did you choose to have that wrong thing done? Not why did you go into all the detail about it? It was just, why did you choose to have it? And one, it was part of the plot that he was going to do something. Yeah. That there was a reason he was so disliked, and for more than just, I don't know, not just not doing something politically correct for the time. Like he did something very sinful, and they don't have cars, so it couldn't have been a carjacking. Like, it had to be something that happened to people during the time period, and that did happen to people it happens today, but it was prevalent during the time period. I just feel like it's life, and life happens, and how do Christians handle it, and how do other people's handle it? Because Venessa handles everything from a Christian point of view. She does not start out as a believer. She's Catholic. Not to say there's no Catholic believers. I just simply mean she's part of the Catholic Church, medieval church.
She doesn't really have a belief of her own. She just follows what the church says, right?
Right. And the Catholic Church at the time was a profession, not, you joined the Catholic Church because it was your job of choice, not necessarily because you were saved. And so there were many, many, many people within the church who were not saved, and they just made a business of it. And they were still largely, into priests, and priests forgive sins, and you had to have a mediator. And although my book predates the Reformation proper, Tristan sat under a friar who did not believe in the need for priests. And so he shared that with him. And so Tristan shared this with Venessa when she felt like she had given up her faith, and that she was an apostate because of all the things that had been going on with the plague, and didn't believe God was good anymore. And so he takes her through that process. And so she's dealing in life with that worldview, that changed worldview from a Christian perspective. Whereas Daisy, when the terrible thing happens to her, Daisy's not saved, and she really falls into a deep, deep depression over it. And so she has her own story arc, and she's there's going to be resolution for her, but it's gotta wait for it. So I guess I don't know if that answers the question as to why I put it in there. It's just that hard things happen, and I just didn't want to shy away from the fact that something bad could happen.
You don't write fluff books.
No.
That was like my take on it, is that you don't write fluff books. You write real life books, and you don't do it vulgar either. You're still innocent in how you write, and I appreciate that, because it's not. So on that note, did you start the book planning that plot twist, or did that come to you? Did your characters tell you it was going to happen?
Oh, I don't know when the first time that came to me, quite honestly.
So it wasn't holes on your little coupons?
No, it was not. In fact, Daisy was a very non-character. Yeah. She was just the maid. I had never intended for her to be anything other than a side character until Daisy demanded otherwise. She probably wishes she never did. But she turned out to be quite important to the plot, although she still doesn't take up a lot of the dialogue in the book.
She's important, though.
Yeah,
she's really important. And
I had actually intended to kill her off many, many times. Probably from the second book on, I tried to kill her. And my friend Leah was like, "No, don't."
Yeah, she's so great.
She might even be a spin-off character. You don't know. Don't do that. And so I was like, "Oh, fine."
Right,
and so
go back from killing her.
Yeah, and some other things happened I wanted to do, and I was never able to kill her. She just wouldn't die. So,
okay, well, when I'm done, you'll have to tell me what other things you wanted to do to her.
yeah.
Because I don't want to know yet. I love Daisy. That was also a question. People love Daisy and they want to know how. So one thing though that someone asked, I thought you covered this in the first book, but maybe I've forgotten. How is Daisy connected? Like, how did she become Velena's maid? How did she?
It was a very brief mention. I think I said she was Sir Richard, who is Velena's father, who's a baron. She's a distant relation of Sir Richard.
Oh.
And so during the medieval times, people were sent to different households a lot. So like a page started at 7 years old, and you were usually not a page in your own household. You were sent to another household of like a knight. Okay. And so they basically, it's like boarding school. They lived away from their parents, maybe only coming for certain occasions or if the parents visited. And it wasn't just men. So girls were also sent away to work in other households or to learn. Maybe a poorer relative would send it to a richer relative to learn like propriety and to sort of come into age and learn how to run a household. Or I think it was kind of seen as like a step up for you to place relatives from other households in as higher up servants in your household. So they would get jobs. Okay. You know, like the wardrober, the person who takes care of all the clothing, or the bailiff in your house, or something like that. They would put you in a high position. You were usually a relative.
Okay.
Well, so that was all. She was a relative. She was young. Same age as Velena.
Distantly related to Velena.
That was a long explanation for that. I'm sorry.
Good. Someone asked, everybody loves Daisy, so we needed to talk about.
My mother-in-law was like, I don't care about Velena by the third book. What happens to Daisy? And I was like, oh gosh, okay.
Well, you make Daisy's plot pretty intense, but it affects Velena very strongly. I'm waiting for it to fully impact Velena.
And her plot really worked to affect Rowan's mindset as well.
Yes, Rowan's changing a little bit. I'm liking that change. I like that change. I like it. So, okay, we kind of touched on this a little, but I wanted to ask how did you research the Black Plague? Because you said you read letters that people wrote or diaries and things. Where did you find those?
Just ones that were included in other books that other people had written. There's a lot. If you go in the library, there's just a lot of books on the Black Plague, and a lot of those people will cite resources and like have like portions of letters within the books.
Okay. How long did the Black Plague span?
The first one that I talked about, this 1347 or 1348, I guess. It reached England in 1348, but it had already kind of gone like France and Italy, I think, had already maybe been hit. About 3 years. Wow. So 48 to 51. It came back every summer, not winter. Like, you know, we usually get colds and flus in the winter, but this one was kind of dormant during the winter, and it would come back in the summertime or spring. And so it cycled through for about 3-ish years, three and a half, something like that.
Okay.
It was so destructive that there were ghost ships coming in. There was reference to a ship that it had killed everyone, and basically the ship just drifted into port, and then when they went on it, everyone was dead. So it was really terrifying. It would kill like.
It was not a good way to die. The way you described it sounded awful.
In like London, there was like 30 to 60, depending, people dying a day. They were just burying them in mass graves. It was awful. And not only that, the dogs would dig them up. So, I mean, you'd see like corpses and animals eating them, and animals died. The sheep. So they talked about the smell in books I'd read. Like the smell was awful because you had dead sheep lying everywhere and you had people in mass graves. So it was horrific.
Yeah. You can't get away from that either. It puts things a little bit in perspective that we're not quite there. Even our last plague here in 1918 was much worse than what we're dealing with now.
Yes, the Spanish flu. Yes.
Yeah, that was my big exciting thing to research when I was in college. So it's funny, you and I both like have interest in this. I never wrote a book about mine. That's so interesting. So you just went to the library and found Black Plague, Black Plague, Black Plague, and
I
read
just
those?
read them all, tried to get into the feeling of what people might have felt. And I didn't obviously throw a ton of history that I had researched like at people. It was hard because we've talked about that you want to like give all the information you've learned because it's so fascinating. Like I wanted to put in the fact that there was almost another medieval Holocaust on the Jews because they blamed the Jews. One, because the Jews were not as sick in some ways because they had better hygiene from all of God's laws, like the Levitical laws.
Mm-hmm.
So just in general, they probably didn't spread it to each other quite as much. But they blamed them, said that they poisoned the wells, that's why everyone got sick. And so they would go into cities and just kill off all the Jews.
Oh my goodness.
So that's not talked about a lot, but that did happen. I would have loved to have worked that into the story, but I really tried to keep whatever research I did just to how it affected my main characters.
Yeah.
I had thought to give at one point to have it that Stuart had been working to actually protect a Jewish city, even though Stuart's a bad guy, that he personally did not hold this against the Jews, and he worked to sort of defend some people, and I was gonna maybe just bring that in a little bit, but honestly it would have been such a rabbit trail to research which city the Jews were in, to research all that had happened to them, and it would play very little into the actual plot of the story. But I left it out. But it would have been fascinating. And after this plague, I think 10, 15 years later, 20, I'm not sure, there's a second plague called the Children's Plague. Where most people were now immune somehow because they had lived through it for 3-something years.
Right.
But it killed off almost predominantly children. The new children that had been born, the generations born that had not had any contact with it.
Yeah.
And
so
so
they
there
have antibodies built up in the immune system. Interesting. So it was spread by rats, wasn't it? Didn't they figure out at one point that it was rats that were spreading it? I thought it was somewhere.
There's actually a lot of differing views on that.
Well, that makes sense.
But that is one of the.
Don't know for sure.
Yeah, so I couldn't say for sure, but I think one of them that I did read is fleas, rats.
Oh.
How they affected the animals, and then once the animals died off, they would have jumped on people. That maybe it started in China. Weird. Just saying. And anyway, I just whatever. Purely coincidental. But because China had a plague, they had a plague too. Italy, it went through all of the European, Asian.
Well, they would have, exports and things like that. There was still, our world is.
It was following trade routes.
So to speak, but yeah. It would have probably not hit the Americas because there weren't people traveling here quite yet, but maybe.
But it did mutate from something like there's the bubonic plague and the pneumonic plague, and the pneumonic plague had to do, I believe, with respiratory, so it would spread airborne. I don't think it started out that way. I think it started out as you had to touch something and then get it in you, but then it would become airborne and mutate, I believe. Now we still have the plague today. It's still called the plague. Countries have it. Flagstaff had an outbreak of it a couple of years ago when I went through Flagstaff. They were saying,
I remember this. That's right.
Keep your animals on a leash. And it was animals because of fleas. It said keep your animals on leashes because there's an outbreak of plague in Flagstaff. And I was like, this is more research than I want. Why am I here?
You have to get it. Now, do we have a cure for the plague now, though?
Yeah. I think antibiotics. I think it's just antibiotics.
That's crazy. Okay, so that's nuts. Next question. How does writing affect your faith? Like, does it affect your faith to write? We talked about this a little when we were opening, like, kind of what's the point and how does it affect your relationship with the Lord?
I think my writing is where they are in their faith is sort of the ideal sometimes of where I want to be. And so I'm writing the way I wish I were. Like Velena, let's say, Velena, it's an arranged marriage. She's not forced into it, but she accepts it. And she, as a new believer, just wants to do the right thing. She may not have the proper perspective all the times, but in her heart, she feels like she has a strong sense of authority in her life. And she feels like God is the authority of my father. And if I trust my father and who I'm supposed to marry, then it's the same as trusting God. This is how I know his will for me. And I don't really address whether that's particularly wrong or right that she's so blindly trusting her father, but I do believe that God, because we're fallible human beings. But I think through all the things that she goes through, that by the end of the book, the tie-in is God works despite our fallacies, our sin. He works despite our poor choices, and his will was going to be done, because no matter who the father chose for her, it was God's choice.
Right.
That worked for her. And so I feel she could still do that. And so there are times where I'm making decisions in my own personal life, and I'll be like, oh, I don't want to do that or whatever. And I'll be like, what would Venessa have done? She is trusting that God has this worked out. She is trusting that he is in control. And I'm like, that is the way I need to act today. That is what I need to like take on. So I sort of impose on her what I'm fighting for in my own spiritual,
Yeah, I think that's awesome. I love that. So okay. One last one about book writing, and then I have like an end it question that I think is the most important question to ask.
Okay.
So, but this one's still about your style and stuff. So I think you do dialogue really well. And your story moves along better because you do dialogue. Is that a purposeful thing on your part? Are you choosing more dialogue over narrative on purpose, or is that just your style?
Yeah, I think so. I personally get bored a little bit in books that have too much narrative. I do tend to want to hear them just hashing it out and talking. I don't know if it was a conscious choice. Maybe I just fell into doing what I like to read, and she hears her this time. She's
here.
So I know. So and I just feel like my characters have a lot to say to each other. I just feel like that's how they relate to each other, and I don't want to say what they're I don't want to say what they're thinking so much as have them share it.
Yeah. But you do the inner thought well. Also, I like that in any given scene, you'll let us in on different characters. It's not like the typical, this chapter is from the girl's perspective, this chapter is from the boy's perspective. I do that, and I kind of hate it now after reading your books. Like, I want to bring in more.
No, but there's people who don't. Because there's a girl who reviewed my book, and she said there's a lot of POV swapping. She goes, that's not my favorite, but she does it well enough that I can get over it. But that bugged her. I would swap.
Because it's awesome. I like it. I like being able to hear what other people, and you do it well. There are some people that do it in a really confusing way, and I think you do it really well. I really like that. And I think the dialogue helps. Mm-hmm. The inner thoughts help, because sometimes when there's a scene, I don't think this will ruin anything, but like Rowan in the book I just finished has taken it upon himself to mess with Stuart, and he's constantly writing like poems to Venessa, and there's one scene where they read it out loud in front of Stuart, and it's really a biting one. It's not a very nice
about the
poem, and it's very clear. Yeah, and it's very clear that Stuart is the bad bee in this poem, and he has a sting and all these things, and you let us know what Stuart thinks about it, and what Daisy thinks about it, and what Venessa thinks about it, but you let us hear a few thoughts, and they have a conversation, where I think if you stuck to one POV, it's quite possible that the whole chapter could go by and we wouldn't really know what other people thought about it. I just like being let in on. It was such an awkward moment that it was nice knowing what everybody thought about it.
Yeah.
So that's the one nice thing as a reader is you get to know what everyone's thinking, where in real life you don't.
Because there's a lot of people in a room, there's a lot of people in the room, and you're like, it was an awkward moment. Did only one person feel awkward?
Yeah, right. And even showing the awkwardness, even if you're not letting us know what everybody thinks, it was well done. I liked it.
And then Rainy Diaz's personality is one that she says everything she thinks.
Yes.
So she sort of will just chime in with what you're like, oh, that was not what we needed to hear right now. But then you really know what she thinks. And
what she's thinking.
Machias is, another side character is from the very beginning. So I should ask you how you feel about this. The what is it called? I said epilogue. Prologue in the very first book doesn't even open up with the main characters.
Right, it's Machias, isn't it? And
it opens up with Britain, her brother, who's in France, Calais, and Machias, who is his best friend and 8 years older than Velena. So they're the brother and his friend are 8 years older than Velena. Mm-hmm. And they're gone. But then in the second book, there's a little bit more allusion to like just references mm-hmm. to who they are, because they come back in the third book. They finally come home, right? Third book. Yeah. You heard that. Okay. And so, and one of the things that I like about those characters coming into play is you may have gotten used to how Velena acts around all these other people, and they sort of don't see her faults. Rowan mm-hmm. doesn't see her faults. Jaren kind of does for other reasons. Stuart a little bit, but she can do no wrong with some of her friends.
Yeah. But
then her brother comes in and he's like, "What you doing?"
Yeah.
And Machias comes in, her friend, her brother's friend, and he's kind of looking at her like, she's bold. Like,
wait, why is she behaving this way?
Because in those days, it's like a woman really shouldn't. I mean, you can look a man in the eye, but you don't want to appear flirtatious. But if you don't, you'll appear too meek. And so there's this balance that they're taught of how to interact with men, like chivalry codes for women almost. And so Machias is like, she kind of stares, like she looks you right in the face when you talk. And Britain will say, like, you make Machias uncomfortable, Velena. You need to quit, And so you get this whole new perspective of people who aren't used to her. And then you really see, oh, people are calling her out on these behaviors, even if they're not that bad, spurring her on to question herself. And I don't think you probably would have read it yet. I think it is in the fourth book. She loves this book called Tristan and Isolde. Mm-hmm. There's different, two different names for the woman in this book. And it's a book that was written in medieval times. It had already been written. And so, and there's that movie Tristan and Isolde. I don't know if you saw it with
I've never heard of it until I read your books.
There's a modern movie of it. Anyway, a little risque on some parts, so, but anyway. And because Tristan shares the name of this character, she wants him to get with this certain person that they code name his Isolde.
Right.
And so even though there's this stuff going on between Tristan and Velena as friends, she's constantly trying to get him his Isolde, and who is his Isolde, and all this kind of stuff. Now that's fine, and if someone's not familiar with the book, they wouldn't know that it's actually not that great of a romance, because it has to do with
love. You have Rowan tell it.
No, it's Tristan went to go get Isolde to bring back to his lord or king, but there was this love potion that happened that affected them so that they both fell in love, but she still marries the king, but then they carry on this affair behind the king's back until finally separated, and he marries another Isolde of the White Hands. She's called Isolde of the White Hands, and he refuses to sleep with her for a whole year because he's basically still in love with the other one, and saying, for a year I took a vow not to sleep with anybody. So even though he marries this other Isolde, but he doesn't love her. And it's a very kind of so I realized partway through the story, I was like, she idolizes this story, but if anyone knows it, should a Christian be really in love with this story? It's just like King Arthur, like.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It's a lot like King Arthur.
Yeah, Guinevere cheated on him with Lancelot. So in the fourth book, you're going to read, it's a little teaser. Machias, Britain says, "What are you reading?" And she goes, "Oh, Tristan and Isolde," And he's like, "Oh my gosh, I don't want you to read me that. That's like crap." Basically, medieval terms, it's crap. And she goes, "What don't you like about it?" And Britain says, "Machias, do you want her to tell her or should I?" And Machias shoots out this like little monologue of like why it's trash. And so she's like, "Oh." It's like those moments as Christians where you realize this thing that you thought was fine and you liked, and all of a sudden you realize it's not. And so I did really want to bring that out, that she did mature even in that way. Like, oh, this book I'm reading is kind of trashy. I guess I should set that aside.
I like that. I'm looking forward to that. I think you do that well with Machias and her drinking, because I kind of kept being like, why are they drinking so much? Like they're always getting wine. The first time was like an accident. But I
Valetta
was like,
gets drunk on
surely they know
accident.
what drinking too much does. And
Yeah.
then Rainy Diaz, is that how you say her name?
Mm-hmm.
Rainy Diaz. She's always like, let's grab the wine. And I'm like, that's a modern woman for you. That's always drinking, or a modern Christian woman, always talking about wine. And not to say that I have a problem with drinking, but I was starting to be like, there's a lot of like excessive drinking. And I'm curious if that's on purpose or if it's just part of, but then Machias calls it out and I like it.
Yeah.
Like it's a good moment.
Partly cultural, because they did not drink water. It was, there was too many bacteria back then and unable to keep it clean. You get sick.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of watered down ale or mead. But actually mead was very thick, I guess, kind of like almost a meal. I don't know, cream of wheat in a cup. Whatever it was. And but then there was ale could be very alcoholic, I guess, to some degree if it's not watered down. And so wine would be stronger. On the one hand, historically, it's what they drank. Mm-hmm. You could still get drunk, though. And she didn't try, but Machias is a character who cannot handle wine. He has a very low alcohol tolerance. And he says, you wouldn't want to know me if I drank. And so I just thought that would be unique to him. And so he kind of calls her out and is like, she's like, you're so serious, Machias. You're so, serious. Why don't you let down your walls? And he's like, maybe you're upset because I have them at all. And so she does like, well, I didn't get drunk on purpose, Right. It's just
I like their interactions a lot.
People calling her to higher living, I think is what it is. And so, yeah, I didn't call that out as bad in the beginning because I felt like it was just historical. But later I felt like I do want to address it modernly and the fact that the Bible, even back there in ancient times, said not to get drunk. Mm-hmm. And someone needed to call her out a little bit and say, you need to watch what you're doing.
Right.
Because how many Christians are you, baby Christians, and you don't know?
Well, yeah, I think the Lord starts to show us, and it's not your first thing, like you become a Christian, here's all the rules. Like, that's not what that means. The Lord, the Holy Spirit is so patient to teach us and train us, but we as believers also can point out those little things to each other. Like you might not know because you're young in the faith, but this down the road could be dangerous for you in your relationship with the Lord. And that is a very real way of how believers interact with one another. I love the spiritual elements in your book. I've highlighted a bunch. Like I'm not going to go through it and find it all, but I highlight when I really like how you've brought something back to the Lord. You do it very well, and I almost always highlight it because I like how it's done.
Oh, thank you.
I have to take my kids swimming, so I have one very important question for you.
Oh, okay.
So, what do you hope, as the author, that your reader takes away from your books? Like, what is what you want us to have a big takeaway from?
One, I want people to see the characters for who they are, that Tristan and Valetta, they're the beginning of the book and they're the end of the book. Someone to see the relationship of Tristan and Valetta in the end of the book and say, oh, I love that relationship. I love where it went. I love what it was to each other. I love how God intended it to be, and I want it to be celebrated. But I want it to be celebrated in a good way. I don't want it to be like friendship conquers all no matter what, and you can act inappropriately and it doesn't matter, and you can spurn your spouse and like get mad at them for not letting you have your friend. No, I want to say you can have this friendship and it can look, this is what a godly friendship can look like. Yeah. Whether it turns into something or it doesn't, the boundaries, the Christian boundaries that need to be there for that to be maintained and to just see it as special. And then the other thing is I just would like Valetta and Tristan to be an inspiration to other people to make right choices. Yeah. To, no matter what circumstances you're in, to trust God in your circumstances and to trust that He will end the story the way He wants the story to end, no matter your interaction or interference, even in your own life. Because sometimes you're just like, I don't know what God wants. Like, I've read the Bible, but He's not speaking out of a cloud. Right. But Scripture really is all we need. And that is something that He told us. A man's heart may plan his way, but it's me who directs your steps. So when you don't know what to do, I hate to quote Frozen, do the next right thing.
Did they say that on Frozen?
It's a whole song. Do the next right thing. So
is that in the second one?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, we turned that one off. I was like, lame, and we turned it off in 10 minutes.
but she sings the song, but I had already felt that way before. I just felt like, if you can act biblically, then go ahead and act biblically, and don't be afraid you're going in the wrong direction, but have faith that God is going to correct your direction, and that you're not going to thwart him.
Yeah.
Because he's
things to take away in our season of living on this earth right now. I think we could all use a lot of that, of just trusting in the Lord, grounding ourselves in him, and knowing that he's in control. That is vital. It's just vital for how we make decisions, because we might not be able to throw off his plans. We can do a lot of damage to ourselves in the meantime, and to others while
what can I do in my isolation? Like, can I still pray for people? Can I still talk to my neighbors if they allow me to stay 6 feet away? Because a lot of people don't want me close to them, really, still. And I'm less strict in my own life and family, but I'm still very respectful, and I want to be loving to other people, and I don't want them to feel like I'm not caring for their well-being. But I can, if I have to stand there, I'm a very huggy person, but I don't have to hug. I can talk to them, and what's right for me. Can I still help somebody or someone who is sick? Can I still drop food off to them? Or there's so many things that we could still do biblically, rather than sit at home and stew and wallow and sit in front of the TV. And I'm not going to say I haven't had my bad days. I actually pray in my closet, so it's a literal prayer closet. I walk in my closet and I get on my knees and I freak out. And
that's where you should freak out.
I know. I've had moments of sobbing, just sobbing, and over little moments here and there where I get really, really frustrated or depressed, and then that carries me on for another couple weeks until my human nature kicks in again.
Yeah.
And then I recall the Lord's promises, and I go to him again, and then I'll, even in my own writing, I'm like, she wouldn't give up. Melinda would not give up. We're going to keep going.
That's awesome. That's like the benefit of the writer. Your characters will ground you, because they give you something to, you're in control, but you're not of your characters.
Isn't that the way of it? Because we just talked about that. I planned to kill Daisy. Obviously, God did not want her to die in my story.
We're all very thankful you did not kill Daisy.
He's like, your plan sucks.
It's cute. You think you're going to kill her. It's not how it's going to work.
Thank you, Bethany.
Awesome. Well, thanks for letting us talk about your books. I really enjoy them. I'm excited that you sent me your fourth one. I've been enjoying spending time with them. It's been good for me. I go back and forth between that and Francine Rivers Leota's Garden. Those are the two books I'm reading right now, because one is on my phone and one is in paperback. So if I don't want to carry my phone around, or my kids are poloing their friends or whatever, I have the other one. And I read that one in the summer because it's about gardening. So I like to pretend I can garden someday. But
there's your daughter. Okay, that means it's got to end now, huh? It's okay. It's okay. Let her entertain us.
It's been raining for a week, like solid rain, crazy, sad, dark, and so I had to have the windows open because it's been so depressing.
Well, thank you for taking the time to interview me, and thank you because I know they're waiting to go swimming. They're like, take me swimming.
Yeah, they are.
So we haven't planned what we're going to do next together. So if any of you out there have any questions, if you'd like us to talk about any other books, I am reading C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity at the request of somebody.
I saw that.
It's really heavy, so that might be something to talk about eventually, because it's a little bit meaty. But and then right now I'm reading Tamara Lee's The Raveling, and I am going to be interviewing, Lord willing, Tamara Lee on the 29th of this month, and so in July we'll have her. So hopefully that will happen. We have to say Lord willing, because you never know what could come up.
Right.
So thank you very much, Bethany. You enjoy the pool.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Well, yeah, I'll be sitting poolside. Thank you. Eating grapes.
All right.
Okay.
I will talk to you later.
All right. See you later.